In my travels as an explorer and a biologist, I've been inspired by many people who are working tirelessly to better our world. In this series, I'm seeing how their vision is helping drive change and protect the planet, and what each of us can do to make a real difference. Tom Mustill is a media producer with a difference. Inspired by a real passion for the natural world, he campaigns to help people live more harmoniously with the planet. And he inspires real action. And he does this with the tools of his trade, a camera and a microphone.
Pretty cool, right?
So, Tom, I think we could chat about a lot of things.
Yes.
But traditionally, public service broadcasters have really shied away from conservation issues.
Yeah.
Received great criticism for doing so. Is that one of the reasons why you make all of your stuff free to air, as opposed to generally selling to a channel and network that has a bit more of an agenda?
Well, it's just changed so much. Like, you're totally right. Like, a few years ago, maybe like 6 years ago, conservation was known as the C word.
Yeah.
You know, if you tried to pitch a program talking about it, it was thought. Well, I think that people thought conservation was depressing. Mm-hmm. Why include something about the elephants being in trouble when you could just have the happy elephants? Because you could only really watch wildlife programs on telly. There was like a control over what kind of stories were told. But I think it's changed because now you've got social media, and if you watch Blue Planet and you see a beautiful, pristine ocean, and then on your feed from some diver in the Philippines, there's loads of plastic bottles, or Greenpeace has a video showing sea turtles like being sort of caught in marine like plastic debris. You'd feel it was weird. There was like a dissonance. So I think, in a way, social media has made mainstream broadcasting have to catch up and include that kind of stuff, because otherwise they'd look like they were lying. Conservation stories involve humans.
Yeah.
And it's about humans and nature and how they meet, whereas blue chip biology, wildlife stories, stories about animal behaviour, where you try and help people relate to animals by the stories of the challenges the animals go through. And there can be overlap, but they're not actually the same business model. You can sell a wildlife film and you can dub it into 1,000 languages, and you can tell 1,000 different stories over beautiful shots of slow-mo penguins or slow-mo gorillas. But you can't do that if there's a person there with a point of view talking about something that happened at a certain point in time. So as the proliferation of platforms has come about, we've got social media, you've got Facebook, you've got Instagram, you've got the BBC and other broadcasters, public service ones, doing some of this kind of stuff. But then you've got things like Netflix coming along, Octopus Teacher, wins a BAFTA, wins an Oscar, becomes, Seaspiracy. You had Virunga.
Virunga won an Oscar as well.
Right, and most of these films are films made by documentary makers, not wildlife filmmakers. Octopus Teacher was wildlife filmmakers, but wildlife filmmakers are very interested in humans. And it's taken things like that and the audience to say, yes, brilliant.
Give us more of this.
We can handle it. Like, we know about there being problems. Tell us some stories about it, rather than the assumption being like, oh, it's going to be a mega downer. Let's not mention it. People are tuning in because they want escapism with some animal pictures.
Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them.
I think it definitely helps that this younger generation is so engaged. They're connected, they understand, they also care about the planet because they're going to inherit this scorched earth unless we do something about it. Yeah. And riding on that wave of interest has been Greta Thunberg, who has been just a revelation. I feel she's often a bellwether. She divides nations.
I mean, she divides families.
Yeah.
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest.
I feel that there's definitely, when I've spoken to, it does tend to be older males who are used to being the people who tell people what to do.
Do they feel inadequate around her, or what is it?
I mean, I reckon there's a lot of guilt in it. And I think if her message is, we need to do something, the scientists are telling us, and we're not doing it.
But we can still fix this. You can still fix this.
I always kind of started my career feeling like I would always learn from older people. But working with her, I feel like I've learned, as much from her as any wiser, older person.
To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about. But what about a solution that is right in front of us?
What'd she like to meet?
Well, you know, I've never met her in the flesh.
Oh, have you not?
Because I've made 4 films with her, but because it's all been going on through the pandemics and remotely.
Yeah.
I've had to remote them all, direct them all remotely.
Oh, right.
So I've spent a lot of time on the internet with Greta.
Yeah.
On like, you know, in the weird way of the internet, I've been on like Google Documents and it goes like, GT is editing the document. And she comes in, you know, she's like, because we'll like prepare what she'd like to say.
Yeah.
And then, at first I get, I don't know if you've ever had this, but like, have you ever felt nervous on a Google document? It's weird. It's a bit
a very
like,
specific type
well,
of
I was in
nervous.
there and I was like putting little notes being like, oh, maybe this would be a good bit for this kind of shot, or all these like directing things. And I felt I was in the Google document by myself. And then the little GT appeared and I was like, oh, and then I went back and I was like, I got really anxious that all the suggestions had been really silly. And I went and I undid them all and I basically did the equipment of like rearranging the room, closing the door and like leaving.
It is heartbreaking to know all this, but it is also our opportunity. We know what we can do. We can change the way we farm. We can change what we eat. We can change how we treat nature. Some of us have lots of choices, while some have none at all. Those with the most power have the most responsibility.
That film was amazing. That film cut through to a lot of people, and Greta helps, but also just the narrative that you must have helped write. Like, how did you go through the process of coming up with this narrative, knowing what to focus on? Because there's so many issues. There's pandemics, there's the way we eat, there's land use, there's all of these things. How did you take all of these massively disparate subjects and throw them into a one health topic in a way that's digestible by the public?
It was really hard.
Yeah,
I mean,
it must have been.
So the first film I made with her, Nature Now, had been my idea. I'd met George Monbiot. He told me about this thing that him and Greta were involved in, and it was a solution film.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's...
This is nature-based solutions.
Exactly.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, we must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help it.
It was all about how we're not using nature to help fight climate change. And that was straightforward because it's like, there's an open goal. Let's kick the ball into it.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
Whereas this one, Greta came up with, and she phoned up, and she commissioned this, and she said that she wanted to talk about all these things because she felt that that was the main problem that we face, is that we don't think about these issues as being connected to each other, which is why we need system change, because all of our problems are interconnected and because of our broken relationship with nature.
The land requirements of meat and dairy production are equivalent to an area the size of North and South America combined. From Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. We have industrialized life on Earth.
As a director, it's a huge challenge because it's so depressing, you know, to have to be like, oh, you know, this pandemic that's an absolute nightmare. Well, gonna have more of them if we don't sort our act out. Plus climate change, plus like you're gonna have to change your diet, and you know what you're eating is kind of messing up everything. And animals are having a terrible time, you know, and you know everything else is going to be disastrous as well. So how do you engage people with that?
Cutting down forests and destroying habitats, we are creating the perfect conditions for diseases to spill over from one animal to another and to us. The next pandemic could be much, much worse.
Having her say at the end of the first line, if we don't change, we are
Yes.
That helps.
That helps,
suddenly,
yeah.
everyone's engaged.
Yeah.
And it threw a bit of humour onto an otherwise, as you say, quite a depressing topic.
If we don't change, we are f***ed.
Yeah, and it's helpful to have that levity, right? And it also shows she's grown up. You know, she's 18 now, and
She can swear.
she can swear. And because I was talking to her, and I was like, how can we say like what's going to happen unless we, you know, deal with this? And she was like, if we don't, we're f***ed. And I was like, can we say that? She was like, I don't see why not.
Millions have died from COVID-19, Zika, Ebola, West Nile fever, SARS, MERS. Up to 75% of all new diseases come from other animals.
I mean, this is going to sound like really sort of basic, but, you know, we put happy music in.
Yeah.
So that it felt like, you know, and we used like George Fitzgerald, who's like a brilliant music producer and DJ. He let us use one of his tracks and he did like a remix of it. And it helps drive you through. It's quite a long film and make you feel like these things are building up together. Yeah. The other thing is that she didn't want to tell people what to do. She doesn't want to tell people what to do. She wants to draw attention to things that other people are raising, which is why the call to action with this is like, now you know, what are you going to do? And she also wants to explain that, you know, there's the intersectionality of this, the way that the inequality of this is that we have different levels of power. You know, everybody in this room with us has a different ability to affect things. So making everyone feel equally guilty or that everyone needs to equally do the same amount of stuff is totally wrong. It's down to individuals to know their own influence and to exert that.
Big thing is pitching it in a positive way, as you say. So describing things as opportunities to make a positive difference.
Right.
Is an interesting way, as opposed to just criticising someone. You say, well, you have an amazing opportunity to have a positive impact on the planet by doing this.
And so a lot of the linking lines are, we can change, but we can do this, but we can do that. So it was all about those opportunities. The main thing, you know, it was that it's very hard to relate to the atmosphere, it's hard to relate to ecosystems, it's hard to relate to pandemics, but all of us can relate to other animals. And so that was the kind of emotional core of the film, and what it built up to was empathy and a fellow feeling, and trying to talk about what we've learned about the beliefs and about the internal worlds of animals, what they feel, what they think. And so to leave people with something emotional like that and to get that across, we filmed her with her dog. She's got 2 dogs and she loves them, and loads of people have animals, and that's how the companion animals, and that's how it's a route into thinking about our wider relationship to nature.
And finally, the animals. Every year we kill more than 60 billion animals, excluding fish, whose numbers are so great that we only measure their lives by weight. What about their thoughts and feelings? Some animals plan for the future, forge friendships that last for decades. They play, they help each other. They show signs of what we call empathy. But 70% of the animals we farm live inside factories. In the United States, that number is 99%. Their lives are short and terrible. How will we be judged?
I guess all these films, you just try and find an emotional link that other people will find relatable. Even if you can't relate to Greta, you can probably relate to what she's talking about here.
So it seems to me from what you've been describing that the media had an almost negative role to play in the past in almost restricting what we're able to see. Now has this amazingly positive role to play in teaching people about climate change and the positive impact that we can have. But TV as an industry can still have a massive carbon footprint. And this is where what you guys are doing is fascinating, that you're trying to create carbon neutral films. Tell me how that idea came about and how you make it happen in reality.
Well, I mean, I think like anybody who's continued in their career, I've just been, at first you feel so lucky to have a job, and at first with wildlife film, I would take photographs of myself and the team at the airport. Look at all our boxes, look at how many of us there are, you know, and I would try and collect points to get more flights, you know, as everybody did. Brilliant, you want to fly here, you can get another flight there. I knew all the information back then about climate change, but culturally I hadn't seeped in, and gradually I started thinking, what a waste. You know, we pride ourselves on our wastefulness. We say, we shot for 10,000 hours for a 1-hour film. In any other industry, you'd say like...
That's really profligate.
That's terrible. You know, why aren't you sharing that around or being a bit more economical? And so the culture of my industry, of wildlife filmmaking, was quite a wasteful one. We had huge carbon footprints because by nature of going to distant places with heavy things, with many people for a long time.
Not using local talent to do a lot of it as well, to gather all that content.
If you had like a map of where all the people who make wildlife films live.
Bristol, London.
And like in the States, and then some like local hubs in like South Africa, and like you'd see just a lot of flight paths. And if you look at the lives of loads of those people, they're just going backwards and forwards with their things and with their friends. And that's understandable, but when an industry grows up from like a small number of places. So I made this film about humpback whales, and that was a chance to see how easily we could cut down on our footprint. So with that, we used local crew, we used loads of archive. Why? There's a fetish for shooting something specially in wildlife. You know, right now there's probably 4 teams going to be filming the same meerkats in the Kalahari with the same camera operators, probably the same camera for different streamers. What a waste. So if that footage already exists, I just want to use it. I don't want to waste everyone's time and loads of carbon and loads of food and miles and everything to go and get that footage. So we used recycled footage. We left our kit out on location. We took tiny little bits of kit in really lightweight boxes. We ate veggie. We rented a place. Everybody in the production just had a chat about what they could do to slice it down. And we saved 40% of the carbon footprint. And then we used a rewilding, reforestation and forest protection company to basically, still had a big carbon footprint. But we paid them to sequester the carbon using forests.
Offset your carbon.
But it's really problematic. Offsetting is not a solution. The solution is to reduce your impact rather than chasing after the horses after they're bolted and coaxing them back in, which is what offsetting is. And so on the Greta film, the Greta and George short, we had a tiny footprint. It was almost all recycled. The crew took the train. We used an electric car in the UK. Anybody we worked with had to use sustainable energy to power their edits. And all of these things meant the footprint was absolutely tiny compared to how easily we could have used tons of carbon just to fly to Sweden, film with Greta, fly back, and not make those other changes. So we call that low carbon, high impact filmmaking. You look at where your film touches the world, and if it touches it negatively, how can you reduce that easily? And if it touches it positively, how can you amplify that easily? And we just, as filmmakers, tend to think the big problem is getting a film in the bag. So it's hard to readjust and add another thing to your list, but it's actually really satisfying.
Have you ever seen time fly? Watch it slip through your fingers like a cloud passing by. Too slow to notice it leaving, too fast to make it stop. All we've known is to destroy like it's breathing. The pitter-patter of raindrops match the sounds of clocks counting down. Tick, tick. How lucky we are to live. We are a fraction of a second in Earth's lifetime, yet she is our only lifeline. Resilient, we stand on our own 2 feet. I'll tell you, reimagining the future has never tasted so sweet. Like nectar to a bee, honey to a home. No one can do this alone. Tick. The promise of restoration lives within us. We see her in the hues of the youth, and she's asking you, what will you stand for? Now is the time for our regeneration.
We're like weirdo outliers trying to show that it's possible so that bigger entities will go, oh, okay, maybe we won't lose loads of money or time and we can copy them.
Well, that's the thing. As with so many aspects of the change we make to make the planet a better place, it saves you money and makes you healthier and generally makes the world a better place. I think people have always felt that environmentalism is zero-sum, that if you're giving something to the environment, you're automatically taking something away from yourself. And that needn't be the case at all. And I think what you're demonstrating is that actually you can save a hell of a lot of cash by not flying all over the place. You can give something back in a really positive way. I think that's a mentality that needs to shift, is that environmentalism is not zero-sum.
Totally. And I think also emotionally, when I was at uni, I was always the guy who was like, hey, watch out for nature. But now so many of my friends are aware, they've changed their careers. Everyone knows about environmental issues, everyone cares. So you're dealing with film teams that love it when you say, hey, we're going to not use any disposable anything. We're going to reduce everybody's footprint as much as possible. Do you want to come with us on that journey? How can you contribute? And so it's horrible to do your job and feel like you're destroying things. And if you feel like you're contributing and you're trying to fix things as part of your job, that's really satisfying. And that isn't on a production schedule or a balance sheet, but it is in terms of who's going to want to work with you in the future, who's going to have the space or the positive mental attitude to come up with better creative decisions. And I think it used to be in film that you could have an unaccompanied minor on a set. And it used to be that you could just get someone to climb a really tall ladder without any training or risk assessment. And probably the first teams who were like, let's have a grown-up look after that kid, or the first teams who are like, should they climb the ladder? And is that ladder okay? Were perceived as pains in the arse.
Yeah.
You know, oh, we haven't got time, that's going to be costly.
Yeah.
But now it's part of our duty of care.
Yeah.
And I think this is really simple. We're aware of a harm, we're aware that we can mitigate and control that harm, so it's going to become part of our duty of care as filmmakers.
It still needs trailblazers, and that's what you guys are doing, which is amazing.
Oh,
I kind of feel that I've spent a lot of the last 20 years of my career trying to convince other people around the world that the planet means as much to them as it means to me. Mm-hmm. And what you've really articulated today is that the way you do that is by making people fall in love with the planet. Mm-hmm. That's the key thing. I think your films do that. And if you could look back on the last 10, 15, 20 years of your own filmmaking, what do you think you've done that really cuts through, that really made people fall in love with the planet, that really has made a change?
Well, I think that the first film with Greta and George had the most views, and I've had people like climate negotiators at the UN say, oh, that made our job easier. Mm. We were advocating for the protection of forests and other things like algae and things that grow and live as a tool in climate, where previously where people were just saying, yeah, let's build a big energy carbon capture and storage device.
I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree.
I've also seen other films use similar visual motifs that we used in that since then. So definitely that one there And it was interesting because I didn't really think about that film. I was been writing a book and we just made it in our spare time in my spare room. Mm. And in a way, because I didn't have an exec on my shoulder being like, it must be like this, and I didn't have anybody saying, it better get this many viewers, you know, I didn't have room for the doubts. And so I could just try some weird music video editing, put music I liked in it, get them to talk to me like they normally talk to me. You know, Greta and George are really personable when they talk directly to you, but you see them often like that. So I was like, oh, let's just get you to talk. So all those kind of creative decisions, the way we just gave it away for free because it didn't really cost us anything to make, that meant it spread. All of those things contributed to its success and impact. And so I've learned a lot from that about authenticity and about trusting your own instincts and thinking about knowing when you come across a story that you feel you want to tell other people that will make their lives better, that they will want to tell other people, that to follow that.
But people also want to get involved. They want to pick up a camera and do something themselves. And how easy is that? How can you make a difference being at home with a phone, making a film? Is it possible? What do people do?
I mean, it's so much easier than it used to be. It used to be that you had to get a mortgage to buy a camera that could shoot any animals. And my phone is better than the camera I was using 10 years ago, or 4 years ago. It's 4K. Yeah. You know, I can just send people the shots that I've got. I can edit it on it. People now have the means. You have a camera, you have a broadcaster, YouTube, Instagram, whatever. So what's left is authenticity. And that's really exciting as a storyteller, because it means rather than having to go to work for some giant organization and fit yourself into their way of telling stories, the way you will succeed is by having your own way of telling stories and of people relating to that. It's a really exciting time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you.
Cheers, likewise.
Yeah, putting a face to the many viral memes that I've seen.
A face to a viral meme.
It's a nice thing to do. Yeah, and what a face.